Good evening and welcome to SUAANGAN. My name is Stan Gruben. Tonight we'd like to show you our last program of the season, the Horton River Cleanup. After many years of negotiations, work began in June of 1994 on the largest environmental services contract awarded to the Inuvialuit Development Corporation. Horton River is located about 125 miles east of Tuktoyaktok on the shores of Franklin Bay. We'd like to thank everyone that helped throughout our programming this year, and we hope you enjoy this program tonight. Horton River was the site for a dew-line station which operated in the early 60s. These distant early warning stations provided security at a time when world peace was threatened. Hundreds of people worked on these projects, including many Inuvialuit from the Western Arctic. The Inuvialuit are back again, this time to clean and tear down what was left behind over 30 years ago. When Horton River was abandoned, everything was left behind. The work will include the disposal of buildings and about 5,000 barrels. Also the stabilizing of existing landfills and removing from the site PCBs, asbestos, heavy metals, petroleum, oil, and lubricants. The contract that was awarded to the Inuvialuit Development Corporation by the Department of Indian Affairs trained and employed more than 30 Northerners, the majority of whom were Inuvialuit from Tuk and Palatuk. The subcontractors included Tuk and Palatuk Community Corporations, Abati Limited, an environment services company owned by Nunasi and IDC, Store & Sons, Gruben Transport of Tuk, Stanton Distributors of Inuvik, ISGL, Aklak Air Limited, Inuvialuit Projects Incorporated, IDC, Canadian Helicopters Limited. Russell Newmark explains the process that led to Horton River eventually being cleaned.
The cleanup at Horton starting this year happened only after an unbelievable amount of discussions, conversations, letters, and even an arbitration dispute. And, just sort of briefly, what led up to Horton cleanup actually coming about was that really, it started in the late 1980s when Canada Department of National Defense indicated to us that they wanted to replace the existing dew-line system with a north warning system, and that they wanted to construct a short-range radar site at Horton River. Now, Horton River is what we call an Annex R reservation in the final agreement, meaning that it is a site that's reserved for the Department of Indian and National Defense on Inuvialuit land. So the Inuvialuit own it, and the reservation is like a surface right or a right-of-way or something like that. Now, when we had been informed or notified that they wanted to make Horton River into a short-range radar site, we told them, well, you must negotiate with us, because in the final agreement it says that if an Annex R reservation is no longer needed for what it was intended, that Canada must relinquish that reservation and remove it as an encumbrance against the title of the Inuvialuit lands. Part of giving up that reservation includes cleaning it up. So Canada at that time didn't agree and said, we're just going to turn it into a short-range radar site. So at that time, I think in 1989, we actually filed for arbitration and asked that the panel direct Canada to relinquish the reservation and clean it up. Now, about 2 or 3 days before the panel was going to hear it, they actually Canada actually entered into agreement with us and said, okay, let's settle this before we go to court, in essence. And in that settlement, they said, we will clean up Horton River, we will give up the reservation immediately, and we will basically remove everything that's there, the thousands of drums and the buildings and so on. So, we were real happy, great, Horton River's going to get cleaned up. That was 1989. So 3-4 years went by, and we just couldn't seem to get them to act on it. It was problems about how it was going to be cleaned up and who was going to do it and how was the contract going to be done, and really fundamentally the application appropriation of the money. Like, it didn't seem that Diane really wanted to do the cleanup or didn't want to spend the money. So after so many letters that I lost track and so many meetings that I lost track, we finally decided we were going to file for actual arbitration. So we filed for arbitration, and the panel heard us in 1993, and in February of this year, On about 5 or 6 specific questions relating to Horton River, the panel ruled in our favor and said, yes, the site has got to be cleaned up. Yes, the reservation's got to be relinquished. Yes, all of the materials have got to be shipped off the site. And so we were really happy with that and pleased that we were successful in the arbitration. And we sort of immediately went to Diane and said, look, let's get this done. You know, the panel has directed it. And I guess this time, to Diane's credit, they did move relatively quickly. We were able to enter into an agreement with them to mobilize, and then we subsequently were able to enter into agreement to clean up. And there were sort of very intense negotiations and correspondences because we had to get all of our groups on side, the community corporations, the Newmark Development Corporation, the Regional Corporation, and make sure that the communities and the Nunavut were satisfied with the way we were proposing to do the cleanup. As well, Diane had to get all of their groups on side, from Public Works and their Action on Waste people, and it took a lot of effort and a lot of hard work to get it done, but we were successful in being able to move basically from getting the ruling in February to actually getting the cleanup done this summer. So it was it worked out quite well, but it was a long, hard struggle for 4 or 5 years to get it addressed.
Okay.
Norm Sancartier is a resource management officer for the Department of Indian Affairs and Northern Development.
Well, first we had to do an extensive inventory to find out what was there and in what quantities. We did that starting in 1988. Then in 1992, we did some environmental assessments. And from the inventories and the environmental assessments, we were able to determine exactly what was there and in what quantities, if there was any hazardous materials and where they were. Were they in the water? Were they in the ground?
Was it pretty messy?
Not really. As compared to the rest of the Dewline sites, Horton River is probably one of the cleanest ones. There was a lot of scattered debris that was aesthetically unpleasing, but as far as hazardous material, there was very little.
So it didn't really pose a threat to the environment or the wildlife?
Not really, no.
Initially, our involvement evolved through the experience we've gained in cleaning up Atkinson Point. Atkinson Point cleanup, actually Atkinson Point is an old Dewline site that's situated on the Crown lands. Last year we've made arrangements with Diane through Action on Waste to clean up Atkinson Point, and essentially that's how our involvement came to Horton River. Basically what we did at Atkinson Point was that we consolidated all the barrels on the site in the surrounding area and all the general debris on the site and surrounding area. Basically what we did was we consolidated that and we staged it in a certain area where I believe this year we're going to go back to Atkinson Point and crush the barrels, palletize them, sea-can all the general debris and get them ready to be shipped out of Atkinson Point. So essentially that's how our involvement came about for Horton River. Primarily, we came, we've lobbied our Nunavut Development Corporation to be involved in Horton River because of Atkinson Point and our experience in Atkinson Point. We've basically approached the Polita Community Corporation primarily because Horton River is in the 7-1A lands that are closer to Paltuk and the Tuktoyaktuk communities. Because Horton River was closer to both communities, our position to our Inevaluate Development Corporation and IRC was that we wanted to be involved in the cleanup. And essentially that's how it evolved.
William Gruben was the Inevaluate Land Administrator during the cleanup process. He explains ILA's mandate towards such project as at Horton River.
Our mandate clearly states that the Inevaluate Land Administration is responsible for ensuring that our lands are kept in as natural a state as possible. And because the Dewline site or Horton River is an Annex R reservation in the Inevaluate Final Agreement, the responsibility to clean it up was deemed the responsibility of Canada. And even though we had been negotiating the cleanup for a number of years, ILA felt that it'd be prudent that we become part of the negotiating team so that we can portray to Canada, to the government of Canada, as to how we expected the land to be cleaned up before we would accept it back. Now, during the earlier parts and the earlier discussions that led up to the arbitration, which ruled in our favor, IRC negotiated directly with the government of Canada, and I believe that negotiations at that time took place between the Department of National Defense and the Department of Indian Affairs and Northern Development. But our role in there, I'll just keep on here a little bit. Our role clearly, or our mandate clearly defines that ILA has to take responsibility for any activities on our land. And in my opinion, or in the opinion of ILA, that role can be expanded to these Annex R reservations that we will ultimately be accepting back from the government of Canada. And the only way that we feel that we would be satisfied in accepting the land back is if we were part of the process right from the outset in determining how it's going to be cleaned up.
As the subcontractors for IDC at Horton River, essentially what we got was the labor contract. We employ 20 personnel on site every day. The personnel is split from Paltuk and the Tuk community corporations. The Paltuk has 10 personnel on site, and we have 10 personnel on site.
Well, to me, it's a classic win-win situation because on the one hand, you're able to generate very significant employment and business opportunities, and at the other hand, you're able to get a site that's was a real scar on the land cleaned up. So it was a real win-win. You know, we were able to clean it up and at the same time generate jobs and opportunities. So it was a great conclusion, great outcome.
From an economic point of view, it was cleaned up by Inevaluate beneficiaries, Inevaluate companies. The land has been now completely cleaned up to just about its original state, so the environment wins.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, right now, jobs are scarce in our region. The initial cleaning up of Atkinson Point and now Horton River, which is a much larger, more industrial type of a cleanup. Initially, the economics of that is certainly puts money in the pockets of people in Paltuk and Tuk that aren't employed. Although it's a short-term project, it at least helps fill in the vacuum that the industry left in our region.
When is this project expected to be completed?
Well, we've started on in mid-June. I really can't gauge when the project is to be completed. In my own opinion, that it would take another month, so we'd go into mid-August by the time it may be complete.
I'd like everything to be gone. Okay, that was the stand that we took during the negotiations, and that direction came from the communities. And prior to IRC, ILA going into any negotiations with the Government of Canada, we got a feeling from the communities that they wanted us to start the negotiations by saying that they wanted everything removed from the land. As to how we will accept it, we're starting to find out that in certain instances where there has been material that has been buried deep into the ground, that we're going to be causing more damage in trying to remove these barrels, and a lot of them are barrels. In trying to move those barrels, we're going to be causing more damage to the environment. So on a couple of instances, those are purely judgment calls as to whether or not we want to stand by and adhere to what we've agreed to the letter, as opposed to letting some common sense enter into the decision making. The one thing is that everything on the beach for sure is going. Everything on top, including the old buildings, and there's some landfills that are surface debris. Those are all going. The only two sections that we will be leaving relatively untouched is the old landfill site there, basically because we don't know what's in that landfill. We don't know how far down into the ground it goes. So on that one, we agreed with the Government of Canada that in the interest of the environment, it might do a lot more harm if we tried to remove the landfill. So on that instance, we've agreed to leave that is and just engineer it so that in the future, if any leaching does occur through our monitoring program that we have agreed to in our protocol with Diane, we would be able to catch whether or not the engineered landfill is working. Now, the other instance where we've agreed to leave some debris behind is just to the north of the present airstrip, where it was our monitor, our ILA monitor, that was walking and noticed that as the thawing occurred, there were some barrels that were starting to pop up from the ground. Now, upon further investigation, we're starting to find that these barrels cover an area probably of approximately 200 feet by 200 feet. And in some instances, they're 2 or 3 barrels deep. Now, we wouldn't be able to restore the land to a pristine condition if we took all those barrels out, because we'd be starting to expose the permafrost, and even if we tried to cover the big hole with gravel, it continuously would slough. So on that instance, we kind of let common sense prevail and agreed that we'd leave those, but Diane is going to accept responsibility for that section, that if they ever do start popping up, then we will go in and remove them.
Okay, in terms of the cost, the logistics alone just to clean up Horton River is fairly large. Gruben's as a major contractor basically looks after the logistics, and they put in place the site superintendent who takes care of the actual cleanup. In terms of cost, the Tuck Community Corporation and the Politics Community Corporation's cost is would run between $300,000 to $350,000 from start to completion. In terms of the cost of the overall project, there's figures thrown on the table. Essentially, that's dictated by how long the project is going to take to complete. Basically, what we're charging the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs is a cost per day, which is essentially Gruben's does, and the Paulta Community Corporation charges Diane on a cost per day basis.
Overall, I think it's gone excellent. You know, we were able to achieve a really high level of Inuvialuit involvement. I think you were out there yourself and could see that just about everybody out there is Inuvialuit, and we were able to get the participation of IDC and its subsidiaries, and we were able to get the participation of some of the Inuvialuit contractors like Gruben Transport and Store & Sons. And the atmosphere at the workplace has been really good. There's been real good cooperation between the Diane on-site people and our people, and very good cooperation with the ILA and the two community corps. As in any job, you do run into, you know, on-site operational problems, but they've been settled really quite well, and it's gone really excellent, you know.
We got Diane to agree that we have our own separate chemical consultant, chemical engineer, as part of the engineering team. And all the test results from the barrels, the sampling tests from the barrels, from the soil testing, all the data and the analytical data that accompanies the testing is to be made available to our chemical consultant, so that he can review the data and correlate that to what the employees of the Department of Indian Affairs and Northern Development are telling us. The reason we wanted that is to provide comfort to our employees of the Tuck Community Corporation and the Paulta Community Corporation, that they would not be unnecessarily exposed to any hazardous materials. That is the premise and of that clause in the protocol. Basically, as I said before, just to ensure the safety of our employees.
Greg McVie trained the employees in the Workplace Hazardous Material Information System.
First of all, the training that is involved would be transportation of dangerous goods. Some of the barrels that have been found on site and then are moving around or off site. Just to give the guys a better idea of what some of the hazards they could come up against, how to do appropriate labeling, and you know, those type of things. Another area that we're working with is the WHMIS system, which is the Workplace Hazardous Material Inventory System. And that entails a very large amount of information in a very short period of time. So again, that's a system of MSDSs, and which are material safety data sheets, some symbols, how do you read those symbols, where can you get more information, just an overall general idea of how ways the employees or the workers and the labor around here can find out more information on materials that they come in contact day in and day out.
How important is WHMIS here in Horton River?
Well, I think it's very important because it's a federal legislated regulation. Each and every person on a work site should have, you know, WHMIS. It's a training. It's a 4-hour training course initially, and then it should be updated at least once every year, just so that people can, you know, just keep in contact with it. The WHMIS program, it's a federal program basically, and it's very similar from province to province, and also in the territories as well.
I'm quite happy with Horton River. There's been a couple of instances where little problems have to be ironed out, but on any project of this magnitude, and with this many different principles being involved in the actual cleanup, you're bound to have disagreements or misunderstandings. But overall, the cleanup is being done to the specifications of the Inuvialuit. The cleanup is going along on schedule. And all the concerns that the communities put forward at the community consultations are being addressed and are being cleaned up. So ILA at present, right now, we're about halfway done, is quite happy with the progress of the cleanup, both in the performance and the level of cleanup that's being done.
Well, I think that, you know, we'd like to be able to build on it, to be able to do these cleanups, and there are other sites out there, Dewline and other sites that got to be cleaned up, some of them on Inuvialuit lands in places like Clinton Point and Cape Parry, Pierce Point, Comacuck. And, you know, I think that we feel that we can demonstrate a real good track record of doing this type of project to a high technical standard, in an environmentally acceptable way, cost effectively, and with the maximum Inuvialuit involvement. And you know, we were really hopeful that we can do this in the future. And a lot of it is going to depend on how successful we're able to be in encouraging government to appropriate the necessary funds to do this type of work. And you know, it's not easy because everybody knows what the financial restrictions are right now, and it's pretty hard to get government to appropriate money to do anything, much less spend hundreds of millions of dollars cleaning up sites in the Arctic that Canadians really, when it come down to it, never see or hear or are involved with. So it is a tough task. But you know, the one thing I would say is that we do have the power of the Inuvialuit Final Agreement, and there are certain requirements that Canada has to fulfill, and that really is the only reason that we were able to get Horton cleaned up, and that probably will be the major reason why we should be able to get some of the other sites cleaned up.
On behalf of each and every one of us here at the Inuvialuit Communication Society, we'd like to thank each and everyone that participated or helped in the making of our programs. Also to our sponsors, thanks to your generous and kind support, a lot of our programs were made possible. We dedicate all our programming to elders, past and present. Thanks for watching. I'm Stan Rubin. This escalator was used to pack up groceries when barge would haul it in.